The new MacBook Pro 16 isn't a huge leap forward, but it is the MacBook that I have wanted for years. Hi, my name is Brad and I review tech for creative professionals, and today I don't have a sponsor, you lucky dogs. What I do have is I just launched my brand new digital art starter kit. It's free if you want to take up drawing, get better, or just wonder where to start on the software and hardware side of things. That's what this kit is for. Just last week I sent out access to that for everybody on my email list, so go ahead and check your inbox if you haven't gotten that yet. And if you want to be a part of it for free, you can sign up down below. Anyway, we've got a MacBook to talk about. Apple has always prided itself on being a step ahead of the market. They weren't afraid to kill floppy drives on the original iMac, CD drives on MacBooks, or even the headphone jack on the iPhone. But over the last couple years, this urge to push the industry forward has felt a little like too much too soon. We weren't quite ready to give up on those headphone jacks. The USB-C sounds cool, but there isn't really much that takes advantage of it. And that MagSafe charger was actually a brilliant idea. And hey, that escape key on the keyboard, that wasn't obsolete and it never will be. Bring that back! You mix that with keyboards that have a high failure rate and the touch bar that had some high profile bugs of its own, and the MacBook line just wasn't looking as appealing as it used to. And that's in a time when Windows laptops were getting really good. I think consumers are capable of handling a big change, but handling 4 or 5 big changes at once, it's a little too much. And that's how the MacBook Pro felt 3 or so years ago. Being Pro, folks still needed that SD card slot or that HDMI port or that, well, you get the idea. But times have changed, and now the new 16-inch MacBook Pro feels like the right laptop at the right place at the right time. They've kept the dimensions the same as the older 15-inch MacBook Pro, but they shrunk down the bezels to get a larger display in there. This let them bump up the resolution to a 3072 by 1920 screen. It's technically not 4K, but it doesn't matter. It looks great. You're not going to see any pixels. There are 4 USB-C Thunderbolt ports on this thing, 2 on each side. Also, a headphone jack. This at a time where many high-end computers like the new Surface Pro X have thrown them out the window. Actually, I lied about the dimensions of this computer. They did change it a little bit. It is now a millimeter thicker. I did this. That's not a millimeter. I don't know the metric system. That extra space houses a better battery. This is a 100 watt-hour battery, which is the largest battery you're allowed to take on a plane. I unplugged the MacBook yesterday just to see how many hours of battery life I would get out of it. I average about, I'd say 5 or 6 hours a day. You may be thinking, wait, I thought there were 11 hours of battery life in there, and that might be true if you're just watching a movie or something like that, but I was using Adobe Animate, Adobe Photoshop, Premiere Pro, those sorts of things. Those are going to be a lot more taxing on your battery, so I got about what I expected out of this battery. Also, these speakers, these little speakers are really good. The speakers themselves are good, but having the speakers in front of you, pointed at you, as opposed to, say, on the side of the device, like you'll find on a phone or an iPad, makes a huge difference. I noticed this on my iMac. The speakers aren't bad, but because they're underneath the screen and pointed down, you lose so much clarity. There's other elements here that are good enough. You know, the camera on the front is only 720p, but it works for video conferencing. There's also a brand new microphone on this thing. You can hear it right now. Probably better than most microphones, but not quite studio quality. The touch bar has been around for a couple years now, but it's new to me. I'm still adjusting. There are times when I'm in an app like Photoshop and I could just jump into the brush settings and I think, hey, this is handy. There are other times when it gets in the way. For example, it's an extra tap to get to the volume, or it's an extra tap to pause my music if I'm listening to it in the background. The touch bar is customizable, and I tried out a third-party app called Better Touch Bar, and it's pretty cool. The new MacBook Pro 16 is, expensive. I had to sell one of my cat's kidneys to buy it. Don't worry, I'm like 80% sure that cats have 2 kidneys. The good news here is that for my work, the base configuration is really good. You get a 2.6 gigahertz, 6-core, Core i7 9th generation Intel processor. That's a lot of words. 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigabytes of SSD storage, and an AMD Radeon Pro 5300M. That's the base configuration, the cheapest you're gonna get, but you can spec these things way up to 64 gigabytes of RAM, 8 terabytes of internal SSD storage, which I could afford if I sold my cat's second kidney. That i7 processor also boosts up to 4.5 gigahertz, but there's more to that story. There are a lot of videos out there about Apple and thermal throttling and their last couple laptops, so here's the rundown. processor runs at an advertised 2.6 gigahertz of speed, but at times it'll run much faster, in this case up to 4.5 gigahertz. This gives the MacBook Pro a nice speed burst when it needs it. Like me, running up a flight of stairs, the longer I do it, the more likely I am to get really hot and potentially break. When your computer hits a certain temperature, it throttles down to a slower speed so it doesn't fall down the stairs. If you've ever seen a desktop that's built for performance, they tend to have these big vents on top of the processors. Those are called heat sinks. The idea here is to take heat and funnel it away from the processor and towards the fan where the heat can be pushed away, thus cooling down the computer and allowing it to run hotter for longer. So when you see those big, thick gaming laptops, that's what they're built for, and that's why they're big and that's why they're thick. They can work harder longer because they're pulling in and pushing out more air. The thinner your laptop is, the less air you can get into it. And one problem MacBooks have had in recent years is they can't stay at that high rate of speed as long because you just can't fit a really big heat sink in something that thin. It's a trade-off. Brad, why are you telling us this? Because Apple came out and said that they have improved the airflow in this laptop, and this isn't something I'm personally equipped to test. If you really want to geek out about benchmarks, check out Max Tech's video. I'm gonna link it down below. But the too long didn't read is that he was getting about 6% more performance out of the same exact Intel chips that we saw in the MacBooks that came out earlier this year. How do you get 6% more performance out of the same exact chip? It all comes down to the thermals and airflow. And in general, I like the idea that the MacBook is taking a slight step backwards. It's okay if it is a little bit thicker, if we can get a better battery in there and we can get better airflow in there. It is a pro machine, and these are the types of things I expect. I'm glad to see Apple moving in that direction. I never thought I would dedicate an entire section of one of my videos to a keyboard, but here we are. You could fill the Grand Canyon with all the ink that has been used to write about these keyboards. I'm sure I'm not the only person out there that's decided to skip a couple generations of Apple laptops because of those keyboards. Aside from going back to the old, reliable scissor key switches, I can also say that this keyboard just feels better to type on. The travel of the keys increased from a 0.5 millimeter to a full millimeter. What an exciting spec, a full millimeter. When I first read it, I fell asleep and missed a video call with Todd. Sorry, buddy. But that extra 0.5 millimeter actually makes a huge difference and feels so much better to type on. Also makes this like satisfying thumpy sound. They also changed the arrow keys back up to the old design. They don't look as cool, but they're more functional this way. And then of course I mentioned earlier that we now have an escape key along that top row. As far as how this is for art and illustration, well, it's a MacBook, a really good MacBook. So it can run anything that any other Mac can run, and it runs it really well. It's not a Windows device, so there's no native pen support, but it should work well with any third-party tablet. And the bigger companies out there like Wacom, Huion, XP Pen, they've all updated their drivers in recent weeks to work with the new macOS Catalina. There's also Sidecar, a new feature that turns your iPad into a second screen for your Mac, and it has Apple Pencil support. I made a whole video on that not that long ago. The too long didn't read, great second screen, but the Apple Pencil lag time is just a little too high. A couple weeks ago, I saw some stories about how Johnny Ive was this problem inside Apple and he was holding back the design team from creating something like this. There might be a grain of truth to that, but it seems to me like there's probably far more to the story than just that. But looking at what they changed here, they're just little things. They've taken little step backs that dramatically increase the usability of this laptop. Whether that's Johnny Ive's fault or not, we will probably never know. But what we do know is Apple is back at making great laptops again, and I'm pretty excited about that. What do you think? Let me know down below in the comment section. Thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days.